I'm Carolee Garrison, and this is Seeking Sunshine, where we find the positive in the trials of life.
There are times when life just brings you down, 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 down to the ground. And it's hard when you can't see the light, 'cause things don't look so bright. So now it's time to reframe and retrain your brain. It's time to look for the good. You know that you should. Why don't you join me? 'Cause I'm seeking sunshine. I'm seeking sunshine. I'm seeking sunshine. Oh, oh, oh. I'm seeking sunshine. I'm seeking sunshine. I'm seeking sunshine. I'm seeking sunshine.
Do you like this song as much as I do? Ooh, it just gives me goosebumps and makes me want to dance. I am in love with this new version of Seeking Sunshine. This is the title song for my album that is going to come out probably around next February. If you want more information, please sign up and subscribe for emails from my website. My website is caroleegarrison.com. Are you looking for ways to support my podcast? If so, then please like it, subscribe it, and leave it a review. Did you know that if you leave a review, it helps my podcast get shown to more people? I would so appreciate it if you could leave some words in the review box and let people know. Share this with your friends and family and just tell them about the episodes that you really like and some of the takeaways that you've personally received and that have helped you out. Do you have a story to share? I would love to interview you for my podcast. I want to hear all about you and what you've been through and how you've been able to seek sunshine in your journey. Please reach out to me. You can send me a message in DMs on social media, or you can even send me an email at caroleegarrison@gmail.com. I would love to talk to you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Seeking Sunshine podcast. I am so honored that you are here and that you're listening to my podcast. It truly means so much to me. Well, it is the last week of the year. I cannot believe it. I hope that you had like a really, really beautiful Christmas. I know that Christmas can be hard and, it can be messy and it can be imperfect, but I hope that through everything that happened that you are able to look back on that day and see something beautiful in it. For me personally, I have 3 kids with autism, and so nothing ever really goes perfectly. Nothing really ever goes smoothly, and it certainly doesn't look the way that, in my heart of hearts, I wished that it would, because that just doesn't really work for my kids. So we did Christmas Eve at home with just our family. The dogs tore up a couple of things that I had made for them, which was really sad. And unfortunately left me a little teary-eyed at the end of my Christmas Eve, but thankfully I was able to move past the sadness and find some beauty in our Christmas day. We went really simple this year, but I think it was good. I think it was good to go simple. I think my kids handle simple a lot better than they do the big complex stuff I would normally like to do. So we went with really simple. So if you have something you want to tell me about your Christmas, I would love to hear it. How did you find sunshine in Christmas when it didn't go as planned? How did you find sunshine when things went wrong? I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at caroleegarrison@gmail.com. You can write a review on here and just tell me. I'd love to hear from you. This week we have a really, just such an amazing guest. Rach Wilson, I could talk to her forever. She really is just one of my people. And I have to say that doing this podcast is so incredible, because if it wasn't for this podcast, I never would have met her. Rach lives in Australia, which is on the opposite side of the world from me here in Utah. And so the fact that I was able to connect with her, it just meant so much to me, and we're just two peas in a pod. Rach Wilson, she is actually a a relationship coach for parents of children that are neurodiverse. So she has 4 kids, and 2 of her kids are autistic and nonverbal and have diet limitations and sensory challenges. And she and her husband have been together since 2003, and they have just been through so much. So in this episode, she talks about hell year. And I don't know about you, but I've had a hell year. I don't think my hell year was nearly as crazy as Rach's, but I related to her story on so many levels, and I hope that there are a lot of you out there who, will listen to this story, which I tell you is just an epic saga. Like, it is fascinating, and it is engaging, and you just can't stop listening once you get started. I want to say it's so good, but like good's not quite the right word. It's very engaging. It's very interesting. And the fact that she got through that year and came out on the other side and is still with her husband, because you have to know that couples with neurodiverse kids have one of the highest breakup rates of anything. And so this is just such an important topic of like, how do we find sunshine in hell year? How do we find the good? How do we find something positive, something we can learn from when you are so burnt out that it feels like you're not going to be able to survive a second longer? How do you look back on that situation and find something good? And Rachel does. Rachel Wilson, everything about her is so inspiring and so incredible. And so I'm really, really, really thrilled to share this episode with you. You can actually go to her website, divinerelating.com, and find out more from her. You can, let me see. She has this really amazing Facebook group called Relationship Support for Couples with Neurodiverse Kids. And it's a beautiful place. And she offers all this training and all this support. And this is such a gift to the world. Like everything that she offers. And she took this entire, hell year that was just thrown at her, that almost killed her, that almost just did her in. And she has taken it and turned it around in a way that is helping so many people. So anyways, I'm so excited to share her story with you and to share this interview. It is really, really just incredible. So without any further ado, welcome, Rach. Welcome to the Seeking Sunshine podcast, Rach. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. Tell us all about you.
Let's see. About me. It started way back 46 years ago. I am a mother of 4. My eldest is 24. She's living down in Canberra, so I'm in Brisbane. It's, for those who don't know Australia, it's about a 13-hour drive. It's a long way away, but she's adulting. I'm really happy. She's got 2 fur grandbabies, but they're rabbits. She has rabbits. So that's exciting.
Rabbits are fun.
Yes, Thumper and Fish. Rabbit.
Those are fish. Such cute names.
I know, they're adorable. And I have my 18-year-old daughter. So my first daughter is to my first husband. So I've been married twice. And then our 18-year-old daughter is to my current husband. And then we had, when she was about 11 or 12, we decided to go back for just one more. Ended up with our son, who is now 5.5, nearly 6. But apparently the door was not shut completely. And we ended up with another little girl. And she is 3.5. And both of my little ones have come through with, they're autistic. They are, I was going to say non-verbal, although our daughter has got speech apraxia. And now just in this last few months, we've seen an explosion of actual words that we can understand. And she's getting better at articulating stuff. So that's exciting. So
that's
she's a bit
amazing.
like a, when you
Oh, I do. I have an 11-year-old with apraxia of speech.
Right. So they usually have this explosion at around 1.5 to 2. So she's just a couple of years behind in her speech. But
yeah, mine started talking at 7, actually, when he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. All of a sudden, he went from just nothing and just exploded in his speech. So, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, it gives me hope. Our
Yes.
son is completely nonverbal. There is no words whatsoever. He's also got an intellectual delay, disability. I'm really not sure what the technical term is for it now, but he's way behind intellectually. So he's probably around, he's six, nearly six, but he's probably closer to a, when they test him, some of the stuff he tests at a 6 month level. Um, some other stuff, around a year old, but the comprehension, understanding, he only just kind of sometimes looks at you when you call his name. He's very much in his own world. He's undersensitive sensory wise, so he's sensory seeking all the time. Um, but he's, a happy little boy. But we've definitely had a lot of challenges with him because he also has IBS, which we worked out after hell yeah. Oh hell yeah, we'll get to that.
Yes. I'm so excited to
Um,
talk to you because I feel like we just have so much in common that I think it's just gonna be such a
yeah,
great conversation.
yeah, I love these kinds of conversations. So yeah, we're a family of four, although technically we're a family of three. And my husband and I have been together coming up on 22 years on the 2nd of December. So we're not far off
Well,
the 22-year mark.
congratulations.
Thank you. We got married back in 2003, so that's exciting, and we have a reputation for having one of the strongest, most resilient, most amazing relationships out of a lot of our friend groups over the years, because we've been so connected. So at the 10-year mark, people thought we'd only just been married a year because we were still very much acting like honeymooners, and very much like that. So, but that did us well because that meant that we had the foundations in our relationship to survive hell yeah, which really rocked us and made, we really struggled through that as individuals and as a couple. So yeah, that kind of led to why I ended up in relationship coaching for couples who've got neurodiverse children. But shall we go into hell yeah?
Which I have to say, like, let's take 1 second and talk about what you do now because I just think it is so essential. And I've been doing this for a while. I've never seen anybody do this, but it's just so essential. And it's like this missing piece that's
Oh,
just not found anywhere. I mean, parents who have neurodiverse children, like that's one of the markers for divorce. Like, and then you have usually there are genetic components. My husband has realized recently he has autism, he has PTSD, he has anxiety and depression, and he has IBS for a really long time. And all of these things, like having a spouse with a disability is another like thing we tick. And then type 1 diabetes is another one we tick. And then like we
Mm,
just have like all of these boxes that we tick off, and there seem to be more when you have neurodiverse children. Just
mm.
they just all seem to stack
Oh,
up, don't
absolutely. I mean,
they?
think about it. When it's just the two of you, you've got all the time, you've got the energy, you're doing all the things to connect and stay connected, and you move through stuff. But then when you add children to the mix, and we'll just talk about, for want of a better term, normal children,
Typically developing.
neurotypicals, yes, typically
Yeah.
developed children. My first was like that. So, and even my 18-year-old, although we've learned more recently that she's ADHD inattentive, and thank you to all my children, I've worked out I am also ADHD inattentive, and so that experience, once you add children to the mix, they bring in their own level of time and energy consumption. Can't get away from it. That's what they do. Their newborn oblivion is newborn oblivion for a reason. That all of their needs need to be met. So now the attention and the time and energy is now split. And often the child gets a lot of that time and energy, particularly in the beginning. And as they grow older, there's different challenges. It's more mental, less than physical, over time. But any relationship that is got any cracks or gaps or unhealthy patterns and behaviors, any emotional baggage that's in there, I guarantee once you add a child, which means more stress and pressure and less time and energy for each other, is going to show up those issues, going to amplify them.
Going to
Now,
expose them. It kind of
going to
parenthood kind of exposes all of our internal
stuff.
trauma. Yeah, all the
Mm,
trauma we've been shoving down and have not like yet healed or paid attention to.
hmm
Just sort of
So
lit
beautifully
up.
set up. Yeah, tell me about it. So, if you think about it, then that's what happens when you have children. But then when you have children who have high needs, and that's, your neurodiverse children, special needs, children who have terminal illnesses or, cancer, which is, these things
Medically complex.
that's exactly right,
Yeah.
medically complex. And all of that adds so much more pressure, stress, time, and energy consumption. So now you've got even less for your partner. But the relationship, in many ways, the reality is it takes a backseat, unfortunately. So again, those cracks, gaps, unhealthy behaviors, and your baggage gets
Well,
amplified tenfold.
absolutely. And one thing I forgot to mention before is poverty, because how do
Financial stress.
financial stress goes hand in hand with having neurodiverse children a lot of the time,
Yeah.
because you're having, these kids who can't just go to a regular daycare, or who can't,
Yep.
all of these things where it takes that devotion of a parent, and then you only have one income, or yeah, I mean, it's just, yeah.
Absolutely. I've taken nearly 4 years off of my business purely because my kids had such high needs and I was so burnt out trying to meet those needs. I didn't have the capacity to do any kind of work. So we lost my income for that period of time. And only just sort of starting back this year. And I've struggled to get back because I've had to manage still being mum and having such unpredictable work time. My husband, let me try that again. My son has been in and out of hospital this year. We've had, when he gets gastro, it's not simple for him. He got a cold flu. It wasn't COVID, but he ended up getting pneumonia and we didn't know. So, these are the things that we have to deal with when we've got kids that have got complex needs and neurodiversities, on top of other stuff. So it's no wonder that our couples like us have the highest divorce and breakup rate of any couple, because the extreme stress and pressure that we're under, the extreme load that we have to try and manage. I mean, they say it takes a village to raise children. It takes two villages for our kids. But one of those villages has to be almost neurodiverse, not trained, but aware and understand. This is a whole new world. Like when my son was diagnosed, I'm like, oh, well, there's a whole new language. There's a whole new, okay, well, the parenting book went out the window because that ain't going to work with him. There's so much to learn and absorb. And, then you've got to look at things very differently. And when you think, okay, well, I'm just going to go out of the house, it's not just as simple as grab the child and out you go. It's like, okay, where are we at in his food cycle? I need to pack all the food because he had food I had to make from scratch. I couldn't just buy stuff for him. He had to only one kind of bottle he would drink out of, so I had to make sure I had his particular bottle. All of that stuff. He's 5.5, nearly 6. I've still got to pack nappies for him. So, all this extra stuff you've got to, as a parent of a special extra needs child, there's this whole other layer of mental stuff that things we have to consider, think of, remember, on top of the normal daily life. And that is, I call it, there's days where I get overtaxed. My brain starts to really struggle. And this is how we discovered me being ADHD, is that overtaxed brain that can't process any more information and I have to shut down. So and then, taking care of ourselves on top of that, which how many special needs parent goes, what?
Self-care? What is
Thing?
that? I don't know what that is. I don't take a
Who
bath,
has time for that?
go to the bathroom by myself. That what?
What? Sleep in our beds all by ourselves, like even sleep all night or sleep with our partner all night. I mean, that's crazy people stuff. So yeah, it's any wonder that couples like us struggle through their relationship while trying to be the best parent they can be to kids that've got high needs. I mean, what else can you do? It's the child comes first. It just has to. And that can leave partners feeling like they're not important. They're not getting their needs met. And all of their stuff, if they've got stuff around it, rejection, abandonment, all of that stuff gets highly triggered in situations like this. So for me, coming back into work, I've done relationship coaching years ago, and then I switched to doing coaching with entrepreneurs and a lot of mindset and emotional transformation, and even working on intuition and business and mentoring, all of that. And then when we had Corey, our little girl, I never really came off maternity leave, because we went from maternity leave into a 3 month stint of Jackson not sleeping, and then I was just getting back on my feet, and then we hit hell year, and that was it for the next 2 years. So I sort of sat with it at the beginning of this year and went, okay, God, universe, whatever. What do you want me to do? Like, what's my next step? I could do any kind of coaching. There's so many options because I've got so much experience. And relationship coaching was the first thing that kind of came through inspiration. And I'm like, okay, I could do that. That feels good. And then it kind of hit me that, like, well, who am I most almost designed to work with through my personal experience and my professional experience? And I'm like, well, people like us, people
Well,
who,
and what a beautiful way to seek sunshine. And when you're sitting here going, I have these kids that are so hard, but then you're be able to take that experience and use it to help other people.
yeah, well, all the way through hell year, as hard as it was, in the back of my mind, I always had the belief that, this is happening for a reason. I may not know what it is right now, but somehow I'll use this information. Somehow this will just be something that I can give back to someone some way. And, it all sort of, on this end of it, makes a lot more sense, because hell year took us to the depths of so many parts of ourselves, to our relationship. I've got a very visceral experience of what real burnout looks like. Not ending up in hospital, thankfully, but it wasn't too far off. And
Well, and
what happens to the relationship when you're in those zones? What happens when, all of that stuff? How do we coordinate things? How do we keep going? How do we flow and be flexible with each other? How do we make each other feel loved, even though we feel like we're ships in the night and not even sleeping in the same bed at the same time for 12 months? These are the things that when we got to the other side, I'm like, well, we did that. Here's the things that I did to get through that. How did I get myself halfway through hell year, stop going backwards and start going, at least keeping my head above water physically through the significant and extreme stress that my body was under? So, all of these things that got me through to the end, and then realizing through the process of recovering from burnout that we had to actually rebuild our relationship. And it was strong going in, but it had suffered some like we'd gone through a storm. There was damage. And we had to rebuild that relationship and ourselves in that process. And what happens typically with a lot of couples that don't have this knowledge that I do is they hit their hell year or their death valley, or all the different terms that people come up for those times. But they don't come out of it and then rebuild. They stay in that survival pattern, which is like two people on two separate islands, and then they just continue to drift apart. And it's so sad for me that that's the case, because I know for me, if I didn't have my husband, who was my rock through that time, that I would have sunk. There were definitely times where I'd considered taking myself out of this life because it was so hard and I was so depleted. And it was him that was my shining light, that when I couldn't do that to him, and kept me here. And he had times like that too. So we needed each other. We needed each other, even though we struggled. We needed each other through that and beyond that. And if it saddens me to think that there are couples like us that don't have that rock relationship to lean on, and it has such a flow-on effect to the children. Whether the relationship falls apart, I mean, our kids are more sensitive to tension in the house. They're more sensitive to when things change. So, our kids also are the ones that need this stable, happy home the most. We need that stable, happy home the most. We need our relationships to be not one of the stresses that is on our plate on top of everything else. So
well,
my
and
passion.
I can tell you how hard it is to so my husband's disabled, and hasn't been able to work for the last decade. He's actually like had this miraculous recovery and he's doing so much better now. But for a really long time he was also struggling so much mentally that our relationship was was really, really on the rocks. And no matter what my kids were going through, if he and I were not on the same page, that was hands down the hardest thing. And
Yeah.
so, and we had times when it was like I had to decide if I was going to stay or if I was going to go because our relationship was just so unhealthy. And
Mm,
I'm going to forever be grateful that I chose to stick it out. And he's had such a miraculous recovery. And
mm,
it's been really beautiful to watch. But I'm so grateful that I stayed through the hard stuff, knowing that
mm.
that wasn't like really him. This is a little, I don't know.
Yeah.
My favorite quote is from Frozen. It says, "People make bad choices when they're mad or scared or stressed." And so, like, from that perspective of like, my husband was acting in pain. He was in
Yeah.
so much pain.
Yeah.
And to be able to see him through those eyes of compassion and, now that we're on the other side of that, like he's who I married again, and it's
Oh,
beautiful.
beautiful.
But it took a long time to get there and it took a lot of patience.
Yeah, and that was like what you just said. When we were going through hell year, I had to keep remembering that neither one of us is our best person. We're not our best versions. When I've got capacity and something happens, I can feel whatever gets triggered and go, oh, that's interesting. What's that about? And sort of process it. And then I might come back to him and say, hey, when you said this thing, this is how I felt because the story in my head was blah, 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 blah. But I want to get your side of the story. And it can do that in completely calm manner, no massive blow up, no over emoted. No digging at him to make him kind of talk to me because he's not a big talker. I'm the one that talks. So I just didn't have that capacity during hell year. So I'd get triggered and I'd kind of react, and then later on go, oh, that's not, I can do so much better than that. But in that moment, my capacity, just like our children, when they've got low capacity, they cannot process, they cannot take a pause and think about that and then decide how to respond in an appropriate way. You just don't have that access. And had to remember that he also, just as exhausted as me, didn't have that same access. And we were snippy and snappy, which is not our normal thing. We would, both of us would be thinking things and have these storms in our head and just be acting and talking from those storms, until at least one of us could go, okay, hang on a second, let's talk about this. And we would have to have those, come to Jesus moments and talk through it. But in that space, at least I had enough, I'd get through the storm, but then I'd be able to have enough capacity and knowledge to go, okay, what do we need to do differently? How can I make you feel loved and connected? Because there was definitely no sex happening. There was no date nights. There was barely even us sleeping in the same room at the same time. So, we had to have these conversations to go, okay, what's the bare minimum? Like, what is the little things that I can actually do because I'm so low capacity and he's so low capacity that it'll just remind each other that we're here for each other, that we're in this together, that I love you, I'm still here. And we were able to articulate a few little things and give each other permission to remind each other. And instead of sitting on this side of the fence going, why isn't he? Because that was one of the big conversations. He would walk past me in the house. He was working at home. He'd walk past me in the house. He'd walk to his computer. He'd start doing work. I'd go to the kitchen. He might come in the kitchen, but there was no touch, no cuddle, no, are you doing okay? No conversation. We were we were literally zombies. But it was noticeable to me to go, wow, we're not even doing those. Why isn't he talking to me? Why isn't he dot 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 in the back of his mind? Why isn't she dot dot dot? Neither one of us were actually initiating it, but we were noticing that the other person wasn't doing it. So in this conversation, I tears flowing. Why don't you? Da, da, da. I'm feeling like you're so disconnected. Where are you? I miss you. And he's like, well, I miss you too. Do you realize you're not doing any of those either? Oh, damn. You're right.
Really open your eyes when you actually
Yeah.
communicate. And it's so easy to forget to connect and forget to communicate when you're just in survival mode.
Massive survival mode. And that's the thing, like in that moment, that helped me to remember, you know, how am I behaving and acting? And because human beings, we are so responsive. We respond to anything. We respond to the lack of communication, of touch, of sex, of connection. We react to someone being snippy, like when my husband gets frustrated. Absolutely nothing to do with me. He doesn't do well when inanimate objects don't do what he wants, and he loses his shit over it.
Oh
But
my gosh, that happens like all the time. Okay, yeah.
yep. So, but my instant, which is my, I guess, leftover trauma, is to get feisty when he does that. And I've had to learn it's not about me. He's not getting upset about anything. It's just the inanimate object that's copying it. So, take a breath, walk away. It's okay. But
We
that's
tend to take it personally. We tend to take other people's behavior so personally, and most of the time, if not just about all of the time, it has nothing to do with us. It's their own problems and their own issues. And so that when as we turn and look at them with compassion instead of in anger, we have a better ability to understand and forgive and to remain in our own calm
Mm.
place instead of rising to their anger.
Yeah, and it's remembering that those emotions don't just go on and off. So even though if you get into that level of frustration, and everybody's experienced this, so you're frustrated at something that your partner's done or not done, and even though they've given you information that means that you don't need to be frustrated anymore, you're still speaking from that frustrated tone because the feeling hasn't dissipated yet. So when you're on the receiving end of that and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry," no, you're not, because they haven't said, "Oh, you're right. I'm really sorry." Now they mean it because the tone says they mean it. But in that moment, we forget that we don't always have control of the emotional component. It takes a lot of energy to feel the emotion and still change the way that your body is expressing in that moment. So if we can have compassion and understanding, we won't get triggered so much by that stuff.
Well, and I feel like we have to just kind of swallow a lot of injustices, like just as humans in general, but
It's
especially
not
in a
fair.
right, but especially in a couple, and then even amped up 10 times more when you have children that are neurodiverse, where it's like, my kid broke all of my stuff. Is that my husband's fault? No, but I'm still really mad about it, and it's so unjust, and he has no understanding. My kid has no idea why what he did was he ate all my chapsticks, and I'm like, now I have no chapstick.
Mhm.
And I'm mad about it, but I can't get justice for that. My kid has no understanding. It's
No,
not my
and that's
husband's fault, and we just kind of have to learn tools and ways, which I'm sure that you teach people,
yeah.
to be able to accept those injustices and go back to that calm place of like, this is okay. It's just chapstick. It's not the end of the world. I will buy more chapstick. He'll probably eat that
Yeah.
chapstick too. I will learn how to hide it better.
There's no place to hide things. Yeah, my 3-year-old's so much into everything. But I get that. I mean, that's part of the struggle with being a parent of kids that have got these extra needs. So one of the ones that I deal with is, it's so common for us to develop CPTSD, complex PTSD. We don't necessarily have big events that cause PTSD. I'm sure it's our children are not, it's not the same level of trauma as like a rape or a extreme physical accident, all of that sort of stuff, but we have these mini traumas, not to minimize it. We have these ongoing traumas. So like my son, when he goes into a meltdown, his hands go everywhere, his head goes places. I've copped it. I've nearly had broken noses. When my little one gets into her rages, she goes at me. So I've got scars from her scratches and her bites and injuries from my children from when they go into a meltdown or a rage. And that causes me grief sometimes because I'm battered and bruised by my own kids. If it was any other kind of relationship, you'd be like, I'm not dealing with that. I deserve better. I'm out of here. Self-preservation, self-love says, no, I don't deserve to be treated like that, but it's your kid. And they're not doing it out of like they're not being malevolent. Is it malevolent?
Malicious,
Yeah, that's the one.
malicious.
Malicious, that's the
I
word.
almost said
All I could
maleficent.
think of was, yeah, that's exactly what I was stuck on. I'm
But
like,
and you
I
know
can
what?
see it.
Sometimes it is on purpose. Sometimes it is malicious. I mean, my youngest, who's high functioning, has a lot of behavior issues, and it's not frequent. But when he has his outbursts, he goes he wants to injure you. And when
Corey's the same.
yeah, and it's like when and so like sometimes it is malicious
Well,
and
it is,
sometimes
but the
but it's
reason behind it is
yeah,
not, and
it's
that's the thing I
still
have to keep coming back to
yeah,
because
once again it's their own kind of trauma. And we're coming to realize that my youngest has PTSD and he's had all this trauma that has pervaded his life, not because of things that have directly happened to him, but because he's got a brother who's severely autistic and was nonverbal and has type 1 diabetes and all of these things that have just built up. And as we try to work through it, it's difficult.
yeah, and Corey's the same. So Jackson hits out at her just for being in the same place. He doesn't know any different, so we try and separate them, but she really gets in his face and doesn't make it any easier for any of us. So
Oh,
she,
it's so interesting because we have the exact same problem. My middle, who's 11, is Joshua, and my youngest is Benjamin. And Joshua hits Benjamin in the face constantly. If Benjamin cries, that's a huge trigger, and Josh runs and
yes,
smacks him in the face. And half the time he's sitting there doing nothing, and Josh just smacks him in the face. And it's like I wish I could stop him, and I don't know how. And we're working on it, but it's
it's
so
a work in
difficult.
progress.
And yeah, it's great to talk to somebody who understands like what that's actually like. And there's so many of us who just kind of shrink into our own little bubbles of therapy and family and kids and like
It's
this
like
is
so we've got
my life.
capacity. Yeah,
Yeah. and
we get
and
to those
how
spaces.
how beautiful it is to reach out and connect with other moms who are there.
Yeah, and who get this. Like this, I've got friends who've got different experiences. Like one of my best friend, she grew up with her sister who was an older sister, and she had an intellectual disability, and she did things like my son does. So she grew up as the younger sister in that environment, and while she has a lot of understanding, it is a bit different when you're the parent in that environment too. So, there are things where I know that she'll get it, but there's something about a parent like me and you connecting where we go, oh my God, yes, you're practically living my life. So I know you get this at the deepest level. The grief that we feel, the frustration, the all of the things, all the feels.
And I just have to mention this because I always am telling people about there's all these little tricks and like tips and like things that you just like. And we have these doorknobs that lock with keypads, and they have saved our lives. So our front
Oh my God.
door, the doorknob has a
Yep.
keypad on it because my son is an eloper and would always run out the front door and hide the key and all the things. And we tried every single lock we could come up with.
God.
The best thing we've ever bought in our whole lives, and you can just buy them on Amazon, and you pick a code and you put the code in and you can unlock the doorknob. We have one on our bedroom door, so all the things I need to lock up, like simple things like my car keys and my chapstick.
My
And
God, yep.
he'd go find the case of Gatorade and dump the whole thing down the sink. So I have a lot of things locked up behind this door, but it's locked and he can't get to it, and it's not difficult for me to go hunt down the key to go
Yep.
find. So anyways, I highly recommend that.
Keypads. Okay, thanks for that. We're in a rental, but
Absolutely. I know,
okay,
absolutely. I'm like,
that's
we could just like, it's so funny because you
yeah.
were talking about like, you learned all these things through hell year, and now you're turning around to be able to help them with other people. And one of the things I thought of was like one of my darkest moments was when Joshua was only like 2 or 3, but he was wiping his poop on the walls. He
Oh
kept
my God.
taking his clothes off, and I swear to you, there is nothing that will just plummet you to the depths like scrubbing poop off the walls. I
Yep.
mean, I would sit there and sob, like, how is this my life right now?
Yeah.
And so now I'm like, constantly, whenever somebody brings up this issue, I'm like, let me tell you the huge list of things we tried so that you can try them too. Like, we
Yeah.
ended up with a backward zip up footy pajamas over a duct tape diaper. And if we didn't have every single step, he'd be able to get through. So we had to duct tape the diaper, backward zip up footy pajamas, and then we had a puffer vest, like without a stretchy neck, because he was stretching the neck out of the footy pajamas and climbing out. So we had this vest, and then we'd put it on him backwards, and then we would zip tie the zipper from the puffer vest to the zip tie or to the
Oh my
zipper
God.
of the footy
Wow.
pajamas. And we tried, like, there's special footy pajamas that are inescapable. He got out of them in like a day or two. Like,
Wow.
it was
Houdini.
crazy. And so like this awful, awful time of my life, I'm frequently coming back to all of the things that I learned from it to help other people because I'm like, try all these things, maybe something will work. I know
Yeah.
how hard that phase is. So
Yeah,
anyway,
thankfully I haven't had that. That was one of the things I was dreading as I was in all these parenting groups and people were talking about it. I'm like, oh God, no, please, no.
well, and
So far, so good,
they
touch
don't
wood.
all do it. Like Joshua, that was a really awful phase, but my other two never had that phase. But anyways, I just keep interrupting you because I just love chatting. But I would love for you to tell us about Hell Year and tell us that story.
Yes, so hell yeah. It started way back in, so it was basically when the pandemic had pretty much hit, and all the countries were starting to do the lockdowns, and um, it didn't really phase us because it meant that my husband was able to start working from home because of that, which meant that he was, because at the time we were living, he had an hour 45 commute and
Holy
so that was one
cow!
way.
Holy
So
cow, that's half the day. 6 hours of
pretty much.
driving.
Yeah, and then you do your 7.5 hour day. So he was gone for 12 hours of the day. He'd leave house by 6 and he'd get home around 6. But so that was, that was hard, me being with the two littles on my own at that time. So what had happened was Jackson had an ear infection, and from the time that he was born, he has had gut problems, going through periods of time where he'd wake up screaming in the night, and it'd last for a month, 3 months, 6 months. We would change his diet. We would do a lot of natural therapy for him. He's always been sensitive to like gluten and dairy, from the time that he was born. So I knew his gut was super sensitive. I don't know if that's because, well, I had IBS, but he was born premature. It was a emergency cesarean. I'd had a placenta abruption, not knowing that that was the case. And I'd had massive pains on and off for 2 weeks. I was in and out of hospital. They kept saying, oh, it's just an irritable uterus. I'm like, no, it's not. I'm telling you, it's not. This is my third child. I know. Anyway, it got missed. And by the time we got to the hospital, I'd had a spontaneous labor. There was blood all through it. They let me labor for 5 hours. I was supposed to go in for a planned cesarean. And then his heart rate dropped. So then they broke the waters to put the monitor directly on his head, and that's when they saw like my waters were filled with blood. There was so much blood in there, and they're like, oh, we're going to take you down to theatre now. So knocked me out. He came out. His APGARs were fine apparently, but I always have a question mark over whether or not that whole thing was a part of the reason, for that 2 weeks where I was having the massive placenta abruption, whether that contributed to his neurodiversity and struggles.
That's
We'll never know.
so, you know what? I'm sorry, I just totally interrupted time. But can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. My youngest had a interest, not totally the same, but a very similar birth story where they induced me, everything was fine, and then they broke my water and the cord was around his neck and it had strung him up and they raced me to the OR, cut him out of me, and his APGAR scores were like 0, like they thought he was dead. Um and so we had this interestingly really traumatic birth as well, and it's like how much of that trauma, like it's really interesting to
Yeah.
ponder on that, and it's not super helpful in the long run to sit there and wonder,
Yeah.
but it is interesting to consider like
Well, his
how
APGARs
that,
were fine, apparently. Like I was
yeah,
knocked out. There was no way I had any concept of what was going on. Apparently his APGARs were fine, but I still have question marks around, because basically what happened was the blood had gone through. They tell me the blood wasn't in the waters that whole 2 weeks. They said it was only there in probably that last 5 hours. So, but he had blood all the way through his digestive system. So when he pooped, they were constantly checking his poop to make sure that the blood coming through in his stools was mine and not his. And what
that's
does that do
so
to a body?
interesting.
So it's always been a question mark. I can't confirm. Anyway, so he has had a really sensitive digestive system from day dot. He had bad colic as an infant. It just periods of time. So coming into hell year, he was already gluten-free, dairy-free, fruit-free, low carb, all organic. Like this kid had one of the cleanest diets ever, and I was putting spirulina on his food, so he had superfoods. I mean, he's never had any major like fast food or packet food or anything. Um, so going into hell year, he had an ear infection, and I just knew I resisted giving him antibiotics because
Because
Nothing
antibiotics screw
conventional.
up your whole gut.
Yeah, it's one of
Antibiotics
those
are
mama gut things
brutal.
that went, oh, I don't want to. Anyway, he was in so much pain. And my mum was kind of in my ear, and because the natural protocol that I put into place once I found out he had an ear infection takes time to work. It wasn't working fast enough for everybody. So I kind of relented and I got the antibiotics and I gave him only 3 doses in that, like the usual, 3 times a day, 3 doses, and it got worse. And every part of my instinct went, stop, beef up the natural protocol, heal it that way. So I did, but I had to keep taking him back to the doctor every week because he was still waking up at night screaming in absolute agony. But his ears were getting better, so the ear wasn't the problem. And I thought, okay, well, now we need to go back and rebuild his gut. So then we added in, the probiotics, and we started to do that stuff. But then, another 2 months down the track, he still was waking up every night screaming in absolute agony.
How old
Uh,
is he at this point? Like two, three?
3. So what are we at? 2.5. So she was 19. Yeah, he was getting on. He was just, yeah, he was 3. So he was up walking and all that sort of stuff. But he would wake up and it would escalate. And he would then, what we were doing was we would put him in the car because it was a sensory environment that he loved, which meant that we could see when the pain stopped. Because if we kept him inside the house, there was emotional pain on top of the physical pain, and that would last longer. And when you've got a child that's screaming at the top of their lungs in a house, nobody sleeps.
You
Although
do
weirdly,
anything. You do
my older 2
anything,
daughters slept through it weirdly,
right?
but me, nope. Even though hubby would get up and we would sort of share that, if he was up with him, I was awake anyway because he was making noise in the house. I'm the lightest sleeper out of all of everybody in the house. So as soon as one of my children wakes up and they're making noise, hyper alert, what's happening? Are they okay?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So
My husband is the one who's that in our relationship. I sleep
that's
like a
me.
rock, but he has insomnia and anything, and he is up, and
And then
I
once I'm up, I'm up. So once they're awake and I'm awake, I'm awake. That's it for hours. If I if I don't have to get out of bed, I'm more likely to fall asleep back within about half an hour, 45 minutes, as long as they go quiet. But if the noises keep going, I'm awake. So he would have these massive pain episodes, and then after the pain episode, he'd be wide awake. So he'd be making his happy screeches at 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning for hours. So I was just not getting any sleep. So we opted for the car. He also was able to sleep more sitting up. And because he was driving, he would then fall asleep probably quicker than he would if he was in at the house, and then we'd have the TV on because he'd have his movie on, which would keep him entertained. And it meant that if I was the one that wasn't driving, I could actually potentially get some actual sleep. So yeah, that's what we started doing. So when he would wake up, we'd get him out of his cot and he would run to the front door and bang his head on the side of the door. We'd get out, open the door, he'd run to the car, he'd bang his head on the side of the car while you were trying to get the car unlocked and get him into the car. He would then, thrash himself forward and backwards. So the safest place for him was in his car seat because it's all padded and he's strapped in. He would bite his arms because he was in so much pain. He'd chew on his fingers, which are still calloused to this day.
Oh my
Um,
goodness, I've never met anybody. My son's hands. My son chews on his hands when he gets manic, which happens twice a day when his meds haven't kicked in yet and when they go out
yeah,
of his system. So his hands are scarred up and his
yeah,
fingers, huge ridges of scar tissue. I've
yeah.
never met anybody who's
And
experienced
he
that.
has he has he has a special thing that he does with his fingers. So he's got where his thumb rubs against, he's got different parts of his hands that are all red and raw or calloused. So yeah, but he would do that, and then we would get the car going and just start driving, and he would scream and thrash and bite and just because he was in so much pain, and that would last anywhere from 10, 15 minutes to 45, 55 minutes of intense screaming and agony. And as a parent, and there's nothing else you can do. We dosed him up with pain meds, all the natural ones we could find. I mean, this kid, we had freaking oils all over his body. We had drops that we're putting in his mouth. We gave him magnesium bars, which helped stop the wideness after he was awake. I had freaking Tesla plates and crystals under his damn bed. I did everything I could think of to help heal his gut. And we were constantly kind of waiting for the next pediatrician appointment where we could go, okay, well, this isn't working. What do we do next? Okay. Then we went to a different pediatrician because it seemed like us focusing on gut wasn't working. And then when I saw that pediatrician, his response was, oh, because we were driving him around, he's like, oh, I think it's just an autistic behavior. He's just waking up and he just wants to be in the car. I'm like, are you kidding me? This kid is in pain. I know my kid is in pain. Fix the damn pain. So the frustration and the guilt, not the guilt, but the grief around not being heard and not
Listen
people not
to
taking action.
the parents freaking know best. Like you just, when you spend every second with this kid, it doesn't matter that they're nonverbal. Like they find ways to communicate, and that's how he's
Behavior.
communicating his pain.
His behavior is always a massive indicator of what's happening in his body. So, fighting for that. So we were up multiple times a night. My husband and I were doing night shift. Hubby would do the first shift usually. And the rule was when the second coffee gives out, because we needed coffee to stay awake on the road, you had to tap the other person in. And generally I'd be tapped in around, midnight, 1 o'clock, maybe 2. But there were times where we were both so exhausted. He would tap me in at like 10:30, 11. I'd do a few hours because the coffee wasn't strong enough to keep me awake. And then I'd be tapping him in, and then he'd tap me in at the end again. So that was kind of on the worst night. But there were times where he might only wake up once in the night, and then I got to sleep the entire night. Well, at least, once he was out of the house. And I would always hear when they came back, and I'd hear him put him back to bed and crawl into bed. So, very small amounts of time we would get to spend at least in the same bed asleep together. But we wouldn't touch each other because we know the other person hasn't had much sleep, so we didn't want to disturb each other. So we weren't snuggling like we used to. So it got so bad, and that was happening at nighttime. And then so I'd usually do the last shift. I'd be so caffeinated, there was no point going home and trying to go back to bed. So I'd just drive around with him, or I would go and park at the beach and just listen to different podcasts, or I'd talk to my friends in the US. Thank God I had them. And we would watch the sunrise. And often he would wake up, and then I had a little blanket, and we would always have our little dressing gowns, and we would go sit on the beach because he loved being at the beach, loved the beach. So we'd go to the beach and we'd sit there and watch the sunrise. And then we would come home knowing that, okay, now everybody's going to be awake. And then I'd start into my day. And my day I'd go to my daughter and then start with her, and then I'd get the breakfast, and then then it just rolled on from there.
Well, and I gotta say, like, what a beautiful, like that. I mean, obviously that is hell year. Like there is only one way to describe that. That is absolute hell. But to be able to take a peaceful moment out of hell and sit on the beach and watch the sunrise, like that makes me want to cry. Like that's, and I am not a crier. That is beautiful.
I loved those moments because he would do happy flappies watching the sunrise and on the beach, and it was just beautiful. So I got those moments. So the other part of hell year, not finished yet. So we had that to deal with, which was extreme, like absolutely extreme. And then Corey started having these epic meltdowns and rages. And they would last anywhere between 45 minutes and 2 hours. It would take me to get her through to the other side. And I would often come out battered and bruised because she would go at me. She'd try to gouge my eyes out, rip my earrings out, scratch me, bite me, punch me, kick me, you name it. And all I was doing is trying to get her through to the other side because she'd be destructive to herself, a lot of self-harm, or destructive to everything around her. So if I wasn't in the car with Jackson, which ended up being 80% of our 24-hour day, I was underneath her, getting her through a rage, just helping her to get to the other side. And she would, at the end of that, she would fall into my arms. Eventually, when I could get her past going at me and she would let me pick her up, she would just collapse in my arms and either fall asleep, and I'd have to the best thing I could do was just lay there with her. And once she would then collapse, then I would, instead of holding the space and just trying to protect everything, then I would fall apart. So the two of us would be sort of kind of sitting there crying in each other's arms. And then she would either fall asleep or she'd sit there for half an hour as she kind of regulated, and then she'd get up like nothing happened. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm just, that'll start over here.
The amount of physical
Mm.
strength it takes, even when they're little. Like they are astoundingly strong, even when they're little.
Yeah.
And the amount of physical strength, like a lot of people have no idea how much physical strength it takes to
Yeah.
keep a child from hurting themselves and others when they
Yeah.
are just utterly out of
Out
control.
of
And to
control.
do
Yeah.
that when you've had no sleep, like there is no time when you are weaker than when you've had no sleep. Like
And
you,
it's night after night after night after night. And not just that, I mean, McDonald's did a killing out of us because we were buying literally at least four coffees a night over the night to get through the night. And that was pure survival. I've never drunk coffee. I hate the taste of coffee. I don't like coffee, but it was a I needed it to survive. So in order to even cope with drinking coffee, I had to drown it in chocolate. So mochas for me, lots of mocha, and coffees for hubby. And then we would make coffee at home because when he would wake up, you'd literally, I had a go bag that was sitting on the bench that I could just grab, which had water in it for him and me. It had some snacks in it for him and me. It had the pain meds in there for him that I could just give him once he, give it to him as quickly as I could getting out the door, and, whatever we could do, put the oils on his belly and off we go. So yeah, just we had it all kind of set up because it just became our life. And what you do initially is you think, okay, it's just once we heal this gut, it'll be okay. Once we see the pediatrician, we'll get some kind of drug and it'll be okay. So there's this constant kind of any
hope,
moment now it's going to be
this like
fixed.
hope, this looking
Yeah.
to hope. That's sunshine. I mean, you're looking for like the hope, like how, like
You need it. If I'd
how do you
known,
else, how else can
yep,
you survive without having that goal,
yeah.
that
And as we got
constant.
closer towards the end of the year, and it had gone on for a year, and we'd been through multiple pediatricians, we'd been to hospital multiple times and turned away because he wasn't in crisis mode by the time they saw him. The 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 level of burnout. So initially we were doing that any moment now we'll get this fixed, but and we were living as if that was the case. We weren't putting any strategies in place that were long-term kind of marathon, let's survive the marathon strategies. So I got to a level of physical burnout, which was there's a level of burnout, and then there's this thing they call depletion. I'd gone into depletion. Let me give you some signs and symptoms of what that looks like. So when we get tired, we lose words. We can't describe the thing, right? So as an example, I was trying to find the word spoon. I was trying to get my husband to get me a spoon, but I couldn't remember the word spoon. The word wasn't in my head. I'm like, food shovel. You come up with the most
Oh,
creative ways to
right.
describe it. So the word stops coming. And then when you go further into depletion, you lose sentences. Sentences just disappear. Beyond that, you lose all words. No words come into your mind to even speak out your mouth. So you cannot speak because
I
there's
feel like
nothing there.
I feel like there's a point when you just cry.
Oh,
Like
there's a lot of
like
tears.
there's
There is a
there's a
lot of tears.
point where you're just like there's no words and I'm just crying.
Yep. So I would be crying through that stage, but there's another stage after that that I discovered. When you go beyond that, when you are pushing your body so much to keep going and you are so far in depletion, and this would happen to me at the end of the day, you lose the ability to understand what other people are saying. You can't understand, you can't speak. I would stand in the kitchen, tears streaming down my face because there was nothing else I could do. Thankfully, my husband would recognize and go, "You, bed." He would just point me towards bed and get me to the bed because it was almost like I couldn't even think to move to get to bed.
Well,
He
and that's
would,
why we need each other so much in these relationships when we have special needs kids. Is it's like when you're depleted, like I've had those moments where I'm like, okay, I'm at the grocery store and I'm so depleted that I'm literally just standing and staring because I don't know what I'm doing there. I
yeah,
forgot what I came to
yeah,
get.
yep.
Um, and then yeah,
Absolutely. It's common. It's not necessarily the level of depletion that I went to is not necessarily common. A lot of people are sort of surprised by, oh, there's those stages. Yes, there's those stages. And then the other part, and so that I'd be put to bed and so I could get a decent sort of 4 or 5 hours before I'd be on shift because there was no way I couldn't be on shift. He was just as tired as me, although he wasn't as depleted as I was. And So I would go on shift, but then I was having these, what I found out later are called dissociative episodes, where I'd be driving and I would see myself pull the steering wheel and drive into oncoming traffic, drive into a tree, drive off a bridge. No desire in that moment to do it, but it got really scary because it felt like that any moment it was happening in my brain and my hand would then go, oh, okay. And that'd be the end of it. So it was at that point, and this was probably about the 6 month mark. So we've been doing this for 6 months, and this was what was happening for me physically. Definitely depression going on, still just pushing myself to do the things. And we did have help. We did have a helper that would come and help during the day. So if I didn't have that, I would have been hospitalized. It would have wrecked me massively. So I was just above that. That's where I was. So I went and saw an integrative medical practice, which do traditional medical, as well as naturopathy, and they kind of combine the two. And thank God.
That's
So one of the first
amazing.
things they did,
That's
and
amazing. Well, and I have
yeah,
to say, like, I have actually experienced that dissociative. I didn't know that's what it was called. Like episodes where you're driving. And mine was not actually in relation to the kids being so hard, although they have definitely had their times. But it was when my husband and I were at our worst, and it
yeah,
was like maybe life would be, and maybe it would be easier. And it was never a desire. It was just like, time
yeah.
to
So
not
that's
be,
when
and then it's like, oh, hey, I should not be in that place. That's not a good thing to think. I mean,
no,
think
that's
about
right.
it.
But these are all
Yeah.
the signs and symptoms our mind and our body give us to let us know, hey, you're running on empty. We're beyond empty now. We're really beyond empty now. Like flashing red
You
light.
need to fill up like right
Yeah,
now.
honey, bitch slap. Yeah, it's but these are the things that we need to know. Like, I didn't know that this, I knew that I was tired. I just kept putting it down to, yeah, I'm exhausted. That's why this is happening. Not realizing that my body and my mind were telling me, danger, Will Robinson, like,
Well, and
this is a problem.
it wasn't just about sleep. It was also about stress and like because that cortisol, that like constant being
Yes,
on like that hypervigilance
yes,
is
not being able to
mm-hmm,
calm down. Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
I was constantly on high alert all the time. My nervous system was fried. My adrenals were shot. They did a bunch of testing and they basically said, like, honey, we need to get you on all of these supplements just to stop you from going backwards. Like, if it wasn't for my son constantly not sleeping, I mean, basically, if we could solve the problem that was pushing me further back, then things would be fine. We would just, here's some supplements and here's what you need to do. Sleep, sweetie, sleep. Um, so it was at that point that we started to go, okay, well, we're at the 6 month mark. I'm as physically depleted as I'm going to get. I cannot go any further. Otherwise, I'm out of the mix completely, which makes it so much more for everybody else. So yeah, huge amounts of supplements, which is a huge cost. Like, it was not cheap, but became a necessity, not a
Well,
luxury, I
and I
guess.
was gonna say none of the things you have described are cheap. Driving around all night. I mean, I know gas prices are way higher now than they probably were even a few years ago, but still, driving around all night's
We
really
did a hundred
expensive.
thousand kilometers going nowhere.
Oh my goodness gracious. Well, and
Yeah,
then all the coffee to keep you awake and all of the one thing that like people just don't like get. It's like when you're in that survival state, like all you want to do is buy dinner and not make dinner at home. Like all
yeah,
you want to do
yeah.
is have
There's a lot of
anything that's convenient because your brain is done. There's
There
nothing
was a lot of
left.
quick fix eating. There was a lot of just grab a handful of chips. What can I just grab? Because I just didn't have the capacity to make smoothies or do all of that sort of stuff. So,
Well, and it's
um,
so expensive. And like all the things the kids break that you have to replace for safety. And like there's just so many things that add up. Like the expenses that
yeah.
are essential for special needs parents, like go completely unnoticed most of the time.
Yeah, and we were kind of lucky that COVID happened, honestly. As bad as COVID was, it worked for us because it meant hubby got to stay home, which meant he could roll out of bed at 7:25 and be at work at 7:30. He could be there, do extra work because there was a time there where they had a project to deliver. And if you know anything about projects, when they get to that last deadline, everybody's doing all the hours. He did like an 80, 90 hour week on top of not sleeping, which meant that I
Oh,
had more load because he wasn't available to me. And that just pushed us deeper into burnout and depletion. This was before the 6 month mark. But
yeah. Well, and so one of the, I guess one of the another ways I'm looking at sunshine is like COVID. Like so many people, it's like, oh, COVID was the worst thing. And for us, our hell year was actually the year before COVID.
right.
It was awful. So then COVID hit and I was like, wait, that's it? This is the bad thing? Oh, like I
No.
can handle this. The
Yeah, well, it
worst,
meant hubby was home. So
right? I'm
hubby
like
was home.
the worst thing
Yeah.
going on is that we have to stay home. Like that's because I've
Gee,
been
gosh
through so much
darn
worse.
it. I know. So on top of that, I had just started to get back to work just enough to get one payment from the contract that I did that our government gave. There was, COVID funding. So I would then I applied for and got the COVID funding for self-employed people, which meant that I had an income for pretty much the entirety of COVID of that first year, or a big 6 months
Yay.
at least. And that meant that I didn't have to push building my business to keep us afloat. At the same time, we were allowed to get $10,000 out of our super to also live on through that time. And then there was something else,
What
there
a
was another
blessing.
$10,000 that we were able to get for whatever reason. So those meant that we could keep the car on the road because it needed a service more often than not. It paid for the fuel, it paid for the coffees, it paid for the supplements. If COVID hadn't hit, we wouldn't have been able to afford that. I would have had to have forced myself into some kind of work during that time at the same time. And I had nothing. I had absolutely nothing. So for us, COVID was a blessing. We didn't get COVID during that year. We eventually got it, I think, last year, but it was not as bad. It was, the less potent version. So we actually, out of that, we gained a lot through COVID. And that money also then funded us moving from New South Wales to Queensland, with a stopover at my mum's, which was only supposed to be 4 weeks, but it ended up being 3 months. And Jackson was still in that phase, which was kind of the darkest part of our hell year happened while we were at mum's, because not only were we stressed because of our own life, but now we're at my mum's place and they were getting stressed. We had at the peak of Christmas, we had 4 teams driving him around, and we were and everybody was exhausted because everybody would wake up when he woke up. And it was too much for my mum to deal with, and we weren't getting a home as quickly as possible. So we're at their place. You extra stress because other people are now impacted by our lives. Extra stress because we have to find a home in Queensland, and it was not happening anywhere near as fast as we needed it
And
to.
moving is the worst thing ever. And trying to
Moving.
find a home that accommodates all of your needs when you have kids like that. It's like, no, you can't live in an apartment when you have a kid who's up screaming all night. Like, no,
That's
you
right.
can't have, like, there's all of these things. Like, we did that, just a few years ago, and it was an absolute hellacious nightmare of like, how do we find some place to live that is suitable for our actual needs that we can
Yep.
afford? It's so
Yep.
hard.
And I was the only one that could get Corey through her rages. So if I was in the middle of taking her through a rage, someone else had to drive him. And Kerry was still working, like he was working remotely, but from mum's place. So he wasn't in the mix during the day. So it was so much. And at one point, I think it was the end of January, beginning of February, but we were supposed to be already out of there. My mum's, in her stressed state, said to me, "Look, we really need you to move to something else from here. Like, we'll give you to the end of the month, but we need you need to find something. Like, go anywhere, do anything, have a look at all your options, but we need you to go."
This is killing us. Like, this is actually killing
So
us.
add that stress on top, right? So now I'm holding the stress. My mother, basically giving me an ultimatum. And thankfully, only about 2 weeks, maybe a week later, in my head, I'm like, look, if everybody just fuck off. I can manifest this. I can do this. I've done it before, but I need you all to, like, leave me alone.
It's like everyone around you hovering and like, get this bad, and you're like,
I know. And it's like, right, just anyway, I created the space for myself. Just, I had to block everything out and not even think about the state my mother was in or any of that. I just had to focus on, right, I know we can find a home. And it all worked out perfectly. But a week later, we got a home, even though it wasn't available till the 19th of March. But just knowing that we had a place to go lifted the
Hope,
stress off everybody there.
that hope will, it gets you through things you never could have even thought possible. To have
Yeah.
that little tiny glimmer of hope, it
Yep.
will just change everything.
So just before that happened, so that was the first part that kind of lifted, and then it kind of lifted more from there. But the I had a day, I was driving Jax. It was another one of those days. It had been a bad night. I was driving him, and it was down on the coast, so I was driving around towards the beaches, and I had this thought, and there was emotion that was tied to it, that I could just drive him and I into the ocean, drown us both, because then that would save the rest of my family, because it had been so hard, so hard, and at, God intervened. My sister rang, and I'm honest. I didn't reach out to people so much, but if someone asked me how I was, I would tell them exactly how I felt. So she called and she said, "How you doing?" I said, "This is what I'm thinking of. This is where I'm at." Cried with her on the phone. I wouldn't. I said, "I won't do it. That's where I'm at." So I knew by telling her she would then call Mum. So by the time I got home, which was only probably 15 minutes later, I walk in the door, she hands me a couple of pills and says, "Have these." And I didn't even question her, didn't even care what it was. I just, okay, whatever. Turns out it was an antidepressant, and she just kept me on them. She says, "You're going to stay on these. You're going to go have a sleep. We're going to take over for a bit." Just kind of rallied around me. Which also caused her more stress, because she's worried that I'm going to, every time I go for a drive, that I'm going to drive into the water, which, I'm like, no, I won't. I'm just letting you know that that's where I'm at, So that was the darkest, that was the depths of it on a mental level. I'd been in and out of it at periods, but that was the time that it was the most serious. And because the question at that time is, we were moving to a new state. Is this what it's going to be like when we get there? Are we just going to another state to have the same Groundhog Day? We were so depleted and, feeling so disconnected, but trying our best to stay connected. It was like, is this what life is going to be like? Because it's just,
Well, and it was just like,
killing me.
this has to end. This has to end. I literally cannot do this anymore.
Pretty much. And I was still fighting for Jackson. Like we ended up in hospital with him. So once we got the house sorted, that was the first lift. I'm like, right, I am not starting in a new house and this is the same thing we're going to experience. I'm not doing it. So I went to the doctors in a local space and I went, right, he's had x-rays before. It's shown that he's had an impacted system. Can you please do an x-ray and see if that's what's going on now? Had an x-ray. Yes, it's showing that there's a lot of, poop in his system. So off to hospital we went. 3 days we were there. Trauma, because of all the things we had to do to him to try and help.
Such a traumatic thing to do, a clean out like that at the hospital. Like,
oh, and he doesn't do needles. Like, he doesn't keep, like, they had to try and put the cannula in. Well, that was a problem, because what they did was they put a mask on him to try and sedate him. He doesn't deal with things on his face. So the second they put a mask on him, his adrenaline spiked. Here's a 3-year-old who's got 4 nurses and me trying to hold him down. And he is fighting us off every step of the way. I lasted 45 minutes before they're like, okay, we need you to go because you're not coping. I'm like, I'm not coping and I don't want to go. You need to go. So then they got another nurse in it, and a male nurse that was, again, they were holding him down, and I could hear him screaming from the other room.
and it's the worst thing in the entire world. It's so,
Yeah.
when my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, he was 7 years old. You're gonna make me cry now. Because I've had these experiences that are so similar. And he had, overnight, he had dropped a ton of weight and he looked literally like a skeleton. And when I finally got him to the hospital, because I went to the pediatrician and they were like, he's fine. And I was like, he can't walk on his own. He's so weak. And they're like, whatever, he's got autism. It'll be too hard to do anything. So they did.
Wow.
So anyways, when I finally got him to the hospital, he couldn't walk on his own. I was carrying him in there and they had to get blood from him because they knew immediately.
Yeah.
Nobody had any idea until we got to the hospital and they were like, that's type 1 diabetes. We have to get his blood right now. It took so many people because he fought so
Yeah.
hard. It took this huge
Yeah.
team of people to get a little drop of blood from his finger because he was so dehydrated. And so, yeah, anyways, it is
Yeah.
when we had that experience and he got admitted to the hospital, I was like so in a different world that I was like, you don't understand, he's gonna break the hospital. Like he's
Mm.
gonna like you just
Yeah.
don't
You need
understand.
to
And we
lock
had
that
to
door because he's going to run out of here. Like,
I know he's gonna change your passwords on it. he's gonna
yep.
he's
Yep.
gonna
That's what-
shut the power off. It's gonna be a thing like you don't understand. And we had to do new finger pokes every 20 minutes, I think. He kicked me in the face, he tore chunks of my hair out, and this is my kid who's dying, who has
Yeah.
no energy, who's so dehydrated, and he is so strong that it takes teams. So anyways,
Yeah.
I
Yep.
have I have
Absolutely.
been there, and it is, I mean, we went through therapy where when he was only 1 or 2 where he refused to let me sit down on the couch, and so for therapy they would stand there and hold him while he screamed bloody murder, and my job was to sit on the couch, and it was brutal. And it's like so I've been
Yeah.
there, and it
Yeah.
is
And this
so
is what
good.
makes up our PTSD, our
I know.
CPTSD.
And you're like, all I want to do is do the job I'm supposed to do as a mom and care for my kid. And I know
Yeah.
that the best thing for him is to let him scream and learn these things, but it's the worst as a mom to have to sit
Yeah.
through that.
Absolutely. And they had to put a gastric tube down, and I'm like, there's no way that's staying in. You know, it's not going to stay in. And they said that they had that because they had to use that gastric tube to put this stuff in. You had to have it daily, or twice a day. So I'm like, okay. So after that first experience of doing the mask, I'm like, right, no, never. We're not doing that again. We eventually, like 2 hours it took. We got back to the room. He got in the bed. I got myself in the little bed next to him, and with both of us, we crashed out because we were so emotionally drained from that and traumatized from that experience. So then my husband slept there the night so I could at least get sleep all night. And during the night, I'm like, right,
Because no one
we
sleeps in
cannot
the
do this tomorrow.
hospital. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, thank God we could have that little bed next door and we could shift in and out. So, I was just adamant, we are not doing that again. So in the nighttime, I'm like, right, not the face mask. We've got to be some other way to sedate him. It cannot stay. The gastric tube will not stay. We need to be able to just put it in, give him what he needs, take it out, and that's the only way we'll do it. So I went into the doctor the next day and went, right, we're not doing that again. This is how I think it can go. I think that's going to be a lot easier. What have you got? So we wrapped him in a sheet. We gave him like an oral sedative. Once that kicked in, we wrapped him in a sheet, not his favorite blanket, because I didn't want that to be associated with that. And then we were able to get the tube in, get it in, take it out. It was still, he still wrestled, but it was nowhere near as much. And then we, went into so I'm like, thank God. So
Was it like Versed or something?
we got through those 3 days. And then we were running into the back of, we needed to go up to Queensland because I had moved all of our specialists. I'd started, 6 months before moving to new specialists because it takes, 3-4 months to get into. So I was already making those appointments thinking, yeah, we'll be there in January. We weren't there in January. So these appointments were in February. We'd seen the neurologist in January. We had to drive, it saved 5.5, 6 hours to go see the neurologist, who said, no, there's not, because I thought maybe there was something happening in his head, because you can't tell with the way that he expresses pain, if it's his head or his belly, because he was constantly banging his head. I'm like, okay, well, we need to check that. Neurologist said no, but I think you need to see a developmental pediatrician. We got in on it was literally, you had 3 days in hospital, and then it was the next day. And I said to the doctor, I don't know, should we be staying here? He goes, no, you need to get out of here. You need to go see that pediatrician because they're the person you need to be moving through to next. So we're going to release you, even though I didn't think he completely cleared the impaction. It turned out it had cleared some, but nowhere near what I thought it would do, but I'll come back to that. So I went and saw the pediatrician, and it just, verbal diarrhea. Here's all the things we've done. I'm a walking medical history for him. And she asked a few questions, but we didn't really get any. She said, okay, well, let's see how this goes and we'll try this. And it was just, for me, it was minor stuff. I didn't get okay, we're going to put him in a hospital, we're going to do this. I wanted something big, because I'm like, we cannot do this. The neurologist had mentioned that if he got worse and things didn't get better, to go to Queensland Children's Hospital, and then they would put a team of people on and work out what's going on. But in my head, it was never acute. Like, it was never that bad, because it had been kind of a slow progression down. If I look back now, I think I should have done it months before that. Anyway, so we kind of came home from that deflated, but we had a few things to try, and I'm like, okay, well, and it was only maybe a week later, and it was, again, we'd spent so much time in the car. It was just another one of those bad days. I'm like, no, let's go to the hospital. It was a fleeting thought. I thought, they'd mentioned it. Maybe that's what we need to do. Go to the Queensland Children's Hospital, and but it was going to be a gamble because we'd been turned away from hospitals multiple times before that. Because by the time they saw him, he was no longer in crisis. It's not appendicitis. Wait until you see your pediatrician. Yeah, great, thanks. So I said to Mum, I think this is what I need to do. It was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a 5.5 hour drive. And hubby had to work. He'd already spent too much time in the hospital the week before. So Mum said she'd come with me. I was prepared to go on my own, but she's like, I'm not letting you drive on your own, knowing how tired you are. Let's both go. I'm like, okay. But it was a gamble because they could have turned us away. We get to Queensland Children's, and right on cue, as we get to the first part of the triage, he goes into a meltdown. Thanks, buddy. They're like, okay, we're going to just move you through into the other section, and we've got a room. And then the nurse came up and just said, okay, what's the problem? And I just started telling her about what had been going on for a year. And she's like, right, hold that thought. Goes and gets the doctor on staff for that day, comes back in, and the doctor says, right, I hear this is what's been going on for a year. I want you to tell me his complete medical history from the day that he was born and everything you've struggled with to now. I burst into tears, and so did my mum, because it was the first person in that whole time that actually wanted to know, that listened to me. And at the end of that, she goes, right, while he's not in an acute emergency, she said, I cannot let you go home. We're going to admit him. We're going to get a team of people on, and we're going to find out what's happening to your little boy. So we were admitted, thank God. And the pediatrician that we had seen, I'd messaged her or tried to contact her and ask her if she would help us to get admitted into the hospital. And she said she couldn't because we were technically living in New South Wales, another state. She was the one that said, look, just lop up at emergency. The chances are that they will admit him, but, can't guarantee it, but that's the best way in. So that's what we did. In the meantime, so we got admitted, and I got an email from her the next day. And she said, I really think, even though we talked about FODMAP foods, she said, I really think, based on what you've told me is in his diet, I really think FODMAP food's part of the problem. I'm like, okay, I'll do anything. I had a friend that was living up here. I messaged him and said, look, can you make me a new, because he was having meatballs that I put all these veggies in, and I made him muffins that were gluten-free. That was kind of his diet, and he had some toast. So I said, look, can you remake his muffins, take out these vegetables? We stopped giving him the muffins, meatballs, stopped giving him the muffins, and I got him to find a particular type of bread that is FODMAP friendly, even though it wasn't gluten-free. It was spelt bread, sourdough, but it was FODMAP friendly. I'm like, right,
What is FODMAP? Tell me what that is real quick.
Okay, so FODMAP is, it's naturally occurring in certain foods. So high FODMAP means that a person who's sensitive to them, it will ferment in their digestive tract, creating excruciating amounts of pain because of the gas and whatnot. When we did stool samples for Jackson, his stool samples, like his poops were like cake batter. It wasn't fully diarrhea, but it was certainly not formed. It was like it had mucus all the way through it. It also had blood all the way through it, but not huge amounts that they thought he was hemorrhaging, but enough to show that his entire digestive tract was so inflamed it was bleeding, and it was creating so much mucus because it was trying to protect itself. That's how bad it was, and it had been going on for 12 months. So FODMAP foods are things like cauliflower, broccoli, but the head of the broccoli, but if it's broccolini, it's the stem of the broccolini, the asparagus, almond meal, which is what his muffins were made out of, and all these veggies were ones that we were jam packing into his meatballs to be healthy. These are the things we were doing. So all it was doing was, well, what had happened when we gave him the antibiotics, that had changed his gut biome, and then he was extra sensitive to FODMAP foods, and then having the FODMAP foods in his diet just kept it going and made it worse over that 12 months. That's what happened. So
Oh my
we
gosh. And to finally have that answer.
Yep. So we tried it. We tried it. I got my friend to make it up. We'd been there 2 nights, so they got to see what his nights were like and see what we had been dealing with. And they were giving him pain medication, and they were organising, okay, we need to get a gastroenterologist into it. We need to do an MRI. We need to, and they had this whole plan of things they were going to, all the tests they were going to do to find out what was happening for him. And so this is the second night in. We got the meatballs, and third night he slept, and we're like, okay, he has had the odd night where he slept the whole night. We'll see. And then he slept a second night. We're like, maybe. He
But
slept
you're
the third
afraid,
night.
at that point, you're afraid to hope. At that
Yes.
point, you're so far in that you're
Yeah.
like, this can't really be
You
real.
almost, yeah, exactly. You're kind of like, no, it can't be that simple. Seriously. He slept for the third night. And on the fourth day, they basically said, look, we're not going to put him through a whole bunch of tests and take him through the gastroenterology department. We'll give you an outpatient referral so you've got a connection to one. But at this point, we've done the MRI. His brain is okay. He's responded to the change in diet. He's sleeping. He's more responsive during the day. We're having less meltdowns because he's so overtired. We're going to call it good for now, but know that if it ever happens again, come straight back and we'll put the team on and we'll get it sorted. So the other thing was to test was, when we go, because we had to go back to mum's, we were still another week away from being able to move up here. So the next test was, okay, well, let's see, once he's back in his home, back in that environment, whether or not he wants to go to the car for a drive, because they're constantly saying,
Because
oh, it's
it's
behavior, it's
right, it's
behavior.
behavior, and that's what, this is ingrained, this is routine.
And I had said all the way along, no, it's not. He only goes to the car because he's in pain. And we got back to mum's. Not once in that week did he opt to go to the car. Not once. And even when we moved up here, we've had maybe a handful of times where he's decided he wants to go in the car for a drive. But it's not been because he's been in pain. He's been in distress for some other reason and he wants to go in the car. Okay, let's go for a drive. I don't mind. 5 times in 22 months, I'm okay with. That's no bigger problem. But I was right. Solve the pain, we solve his problem, we solve our problem. But it took us another 12 months because we were still dealing with them day to day, for us for me particularly, to get out of burnout enough to feel almost like a normal human being. Because what I needed in order to recover from burnout was like 6 to 9 months of complete rest and just self-care. That was never going to happen.
Well, because you still had your daughter and you were still in the middle of moving, which is still the worst thing ever.
Yep.
I mean, certainly this was probably worse, but
he was sleeping. Like,
oh my
him
gosh.
sleeping was like a hallelujah moment. And then we started with a new dietitian up here. It's a dietitian that suggested that Corey was sensitive to salicylates and amines. Salicylates tends to cause hyperactive behavior, again, naturally occurring in food.
I was gonna say, what foods is that in?
Salicylates, so your strawberries, raspberries, anything kind of reddish, certain apples, a bunch of different vegetables, salicylates are in. It's all naturally occurring in food. And then amines is the other one, which tends to cause the more aggressive behavior, the rages. So when we took both of those out, all the foods that were on the high, moderate list, and we only gave her the low and negligent list, she was left with the safest fruit, one fruit. She could have a peeled pear. That's it. And then she couldn't have broccoli, she can't have avocado, she can't have coconut. So all the things that I would add to give her good fats, and broccoli was one of the only vegetables she wanted to eat. She didn't really like a lot of other veggies. So I had to take all of those out, which left her with the things that she would, because she self-limits on top of that. So she eats rice cakes, rice crackers, plain pasta. Occasionally we might get a chicken nugget into her, but she doesn't do much protein. She went for a phase there where she did eat vanilla yogurt, but now she doesn't want to have that anymore. She likes a variety, but she's limited in what she can eat.
Oh, so yeah, no, the food thing, the food thing with autism is so difficult, like without all of the like allergy issues. I mean, my son ate nothing and then he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and then he was actually underweight for a really long time. And then when he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, all of a sudden he ate corn dogs, but he would eat like 9 of them a day. And it it changed his gut health, it changed his speech.
Yeah.
He went from completely nonverbal to verbal, like
Wow.
almost immediately. He started going he was having a really difficult he had been pee potty trained for a few years, but not poop, because he wasn't
Right.
pooping regularly, and it was like nasty and just it was horrific actually.
Yeah.
And then he got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and started eating only corn dogs, but a lot of them, enough to be
Yep.
regular, and it changed everything. Like I had this
Wow. Yep.
great, like, I don't know, like conviction with the gut, on how
Yeah.
essential that is and how it can just change
Yeah.
everything. And like
It
you're
does.
proof of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So our kids, so I can tell with Jackson when something doesn't feel good in his body, his behavior is what tells me. So at the moment, he's been waking up a little bit at night time. He's had this year chronic ear infections. So now we're waiting for an ENT, probably put grommets in his ears. So, but we've had to give him antibiotics on that. And I went into trauma when we were in hospital and I needed to give him antibiotics when he had pneumonia. I'm like, no, 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 I can't do another hell year. I can't do another hell year, knowing full well that we actually have the support. And if it went into that, we wouldn't have to go through a whole year of that. It'd be back into the hospital, work it all out. You know, and I would still
But you
do all
had
the medical stuff.
PTSD. But you absolutely had PTSD from this
Yep,
horrific
from that whole
year.
year's
And
experience,
so
from
of
not being listened
course,
to, all the things we had to put him through.
right? And so of course you looked at antibiotics like they're the devil.
Yep,
Like
totally.
absolutely not like that. Like, ah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's so we've got the solution for both our children. Speak of one of my little devils. Here's one of them.
I know, I'm like, where I could sit here and chat with
Yeah,
you forever, because
I know.
I just relate to you so much. But let's wrap up, and because I know you have a busy life to get to. But what is this has just been an incredible story, and like I am not a crier when I'm sitting here like just tearing up, because I know, like I've been there. But what is one last thing that you would leave us with?
I mean, as hard as it's been, and I'm sure there's going to be hard times to come. Um, I wouldn't change them. I wouldn't give them back. I wouldn't make it any different. You know, like we sort of said, there've been me getting those times with the sunrise with my son. I kind of miss those times. You know, that was the sunshine that got me through. It was that he would still have days where he would laugh, where we'd tickle him. This one here, who is very cuddly, she gave me all the affection and she would fall asleep on me. I mean, those were the moments that got me through. And even still to this day, I mean, their laughter, their smiles, the way they play, the new things they do, every time they reach a milestone, which we know for them is such a huge thing, because you know we kind of measure inch stones here as milestones, because
Absolutely.
it is what it is. They bring a lot of light to our lives. They've given us a whole other level of education. Like, I am a better person for having them. I am more compassionate. I'm more understanding and empathetic. Oh my God, words. I have so much more patience. I mean, we threw the original parenting book out the window, and we've learned a whole new way of parenting, using positive parenting for these kids, because you know they just don't respond like the others. You know, we've grown as a couple. We've had to survive, you know, the hardest times, and learn how to structure our relationship, and ways to connect that, you know, other people just sort of take for granted. So there's a lot we don't take for granted anymore. Yeah, say hi.
That's one of my son's very favorite things right now, is he which by the way what you said was so beautiful. But your daughter's absolutely adorable. My son, he tells jokes, and he tells you how to respond, but his jokes are usually like moth popsicle, and then he'll tell you ew or he'll stick his tongue out. So
Oh, that's so cute.
we do lots of sticking our tongue out at our house.
Oh, yep, we do that too, and we do like rock on, high fives, and we
Oh, I
do the
love
fist
it.
bump.
I
Yeah.
love
So if
it
you've
so
watched
much.
Big Hero 6, we do the fist bump. La 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 la.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that. We love Big Hero 6.
you
Well,
do.
thank you so
So
much
yeah.
for coming on. This was just an amazing conversation. Um, it's been absolutely a pleasure to get to know you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great. It's great to connect with
Absolutely.
other people that just truly understand this. And if we can help other people feel not so alone or help them with their relationship or just living this life, I'm all for it.
Absolutely. Well, I know you have a lot to get to, so I'm going to let you go.
Thank you.
Have an amazing day.
You too. And we'll talk again soon.
We will. Bye.
Bye. See ya.
Oh my goodness gracious, her story gets me every single time I hear it. I'm obsessed. I think I actually heard Rach for the first time on somebody else's summit or podcast or something, and I was just so blown away by everything that she is and she does that I had to reach out to her, and she is just so gracious that she came on to my show, and it just, oh my goodness, it's just everything. This is like the epitome. This is, how do you take the very worst and find a way to turn it around and help others? And that's what Rach does. So here are my very favorite takeaways. Number 1, all the way through Hell Year, as hard as it was, in the back of my mind, I've always had the belief that this is happening for a reason. I may not know what it is right now, but somehow I'll use this information. Somehow this will be something that I can give back to someone some way. Oh my goodness. Okay, number 2, we tend to take other people's behavior so personally, and most of the time it has nothing to do with us. It's their own problems and their own issues. And so when we look at them with compassion instead of anger, we have a better ability to understand and forgive and remain in our own calm place instead of rising to their anger. Number 3, hope will get you through things you never thought possible. Number 4, God intervened. Oh my gosh, just those 2 words like stop my heart. God intervened. Number 5, one person listening can make all the difference. Number 6, moms know. Number 7, I wouldn't change the hard times. I wouldn't make them any different. Number 8, there were moments of sunshine that got me through. And number 9, after Hell Year, there's a lot we don't take for granted anymore. Don't forget to go find Rach in her Facebook group, Relationship Supports for Couples with Neurodiverse Kids, and her website, divinerelating.com. Don't forget to go to my website, caroleegarrison.com. You can find so much on there. You can subscribe to my newsletter and get a free song. I have a page of little gifts you can purchase that have quotes from the podcast. There's all sorts of things. If you enjoyed this episode, if you think that there's something in here that can help somebody else, will you please text it to them or share it on your social media pages? Will you please send it out into the world? This is a kind of story that just needs to be everywhere. It's just so inspirational. It helps all of us be better humans, I think, to hear Rach and her story. So anyways, if you feel that in your heart, please share it. Please leave a review and subscribe to the podcast and let the world know about this incredible episode and how amazing Rach Wilson is. Thank you again, Rach, for coming onto my show. And thank you to everyone for listening. You guys mean so much to me. I hope that you have a beautiful end of 2022, and I hope that 2023 just like sparkles for you. It is gonna be an incredible year, and I hope that as we move into this very last few days of the year, that you can start this brand new year with a positive mindset. It's gonna be amazing. You have no idea what the future has in store for you, but it will blow your mind in a good way. You have so much ahead of you. There is so much beauty coming your way in this new year. It's going to be your year. It's going to be amazing. I encourage you to go into this new year with enthusiasm and optimism. It's been a hard few years with the pandemic and everything that has happened, but the future is bright. Your future is bright. Keep hoping for the amazing things that are coming your way, because they are coming. Have an amazing day and have an amazing 2023. And I'm going to leave you with a song that I really comes to my heart right now. I hope you enjoy it.
I heard you want to quit again. You're feeling like a fool for thinking that this path was meant for somebody like you. You put yourself out there again. Your confidence is scarred. If this was really meant to be, why is it so damn hard? But wait, maybe it doesn't have to look the way they said it did. And wait, what if it's not too late to change your mind or change the world? Don't give up just yet. Your heart feels like an empty shell, and you forgot to breathe. You have a desperate longing for a hope you can't yet see. I've seen how much you've sacrificed. I know inside you burn. You don't think that you're good enough, but tell me what you've learned. But wait, maybe it doesn't have to look the way they said it did. And wait, what if it's not too late to change your mind or change the world? Don't give up just yet. Wait. You may think your time has come and gone, but another day is coming with the dawn. Wait, maybe it doesn't have to look the way they said it did. And wait, what if it's not too late to change your mind or change the world?